some of the stories I said I would like to share with you. I feel like we have a bond, and I would like to be known as the young hip priest. And one way that you become young and hip in the eyes of the youth is really funny stories. So I have lots of stories. Most of them relate to text messages that get adjusted to say different things than what was intended. Mistranslations from one language into another. I have a lot of difficulty with Spanish, and so I have a number of those stories. Unfortunately, all of those stories are like PG-13, but we are a PG camp. So I really did not have anything that I'm supposed to talk about. So I thought maybe we have questions. Does anyone have any great questions? Oh, the box. Can we go to the box?
I can grab the box. I mean, we were doing that last week. Like, I think there's something more.
Okay. Okay, great. Yes.
It's very smooth. There was a priest that we had who ended up performing consecration differently than it was normally done, and we're just kind of curious if there was a valid consecration. He wouldn't like lift the host up and say like, "This is my body, this is my blood." He'd leave it on the altar and step away from it, and he'd just hold out his hand and say it. If he doesn't like, if he's like socially distances, that's what he called it, himself from like Jesus.
Yeah.
And he doesn't like lift up the host.
Yeah.
Make it a valid consecration.
That's a great question.
Did he say the word?
So, yeah.
He said the words, but he like, as if like we were like distant, he'd be like, "There's Jesus. Behold the Lamb of God. I'm just gonna stand here."
So the question for all of our people that are live,
Well, it's,
for all the people that are recording, that you might not be able to hear that. She asked a question about. I feel like I'm running like a course. It's like I have to repeat the question. This is great. If the priest prayed the consecratory prayer but from a distance and didn't touch the host after he did the consecration because he is socially distancing from Jesus. Let me just, I just want to make a spiritual point. Never socially distance from Jesus, okay? So never do that. If that ever comes across your mind, don't do it. You should be socially close to Jesus, always. But that you can't hear on the camera is that there's a large round of applause going on. I'm just letting it settle down. Yeah, okay, all right. I would say that as long as it is a validly ordained priest intending to consecrate the host that is on the altar and says the prayers of consecration, that would be, you guys know the difference between valid and licit. So a valid celebration of a sacrament means the sacrament takes place. A licit celebration of the sacrament means it takes place according to the rules established by God through the church. So there can be sacraments that are valid, but illicit. This would be an example of something where he did not follow the rubrics of what the church asks you to do or tells the priest to do during a sacrament, but still the sacrament took place. So valid, but illicit. I don't think there is ever an example where something could be licit, but invalid. I need to think about that. Anyway, I'm sorry. Quackenbush.
I'm not sure the application you have to look at because I remember Isaac Job, he lost, he was his pontificate.
Yes.
He was not able to celebrate Mass because he needs that for the consecration. He got the consecration with the Pope.
Yes. Do you know the story of St. Isaac Jogues? Everyone does? Who doesn't know? Gosh, there are people that don't know this story. No. So Isaac Jogues, his feast day, so he belongs to a group of 8 martyrs. All of them were Jesuits. All were French. They're called the North American Martyrs. Their shrine is up in upstate New York. They were sent to evangelize in the New World in the 16 and 1700s. And all of them were martyred in various ways and at various times by Native American communities. Isaac Jogues was, yes, but the situation that you were talking about was when he came over and he was evangelizing, the priests were generally respected. So many Native Americans referred to, especially the Jesuits, because they always wore their cassock, they called them the black robes. And they knew that there was something special about them because they weren't violent, but seemed to be men of great authority. So they respected them. And one thing they noticed about Isaac Jogues when he would celebrate Mass is he would always take the host, and the priests hold the host with these are called the canonical digits. Digitus in Latin means finger. I don't see anyone writing this down, but so when you talk about a canonical digit, it means it's the 4 fingers, 2 on the left thumb and your forefinger, thumb and forefinger on the 2 hands, because these are the 2 fingers with which you hold up the host, canonical digits. So when they started to recognize that they wanted to get rid of Isaac Jogues or to affect his power, because they didn't exactly know where his power lay, but they knew it was important and it related to his fingers. So they chewed off his fingers. They gnawed off his fingers. So when he was finally ransomed and sent back to France to recover, he had to request special permission from the Pope to celebrate Mass using his middle finger and his thumb instead of his forefinger and his thumb. And you think, okay, you've just had your hands or your fingers chewed off by these people. I think you've done enough. Enjoy your time in France. He volunteered to come back to the New World, to the same people, and then he was martyred. So Isaac Jogues is awesome. You can go visit his shrine. But what was that about again? Oh, because you have to raise the host. So yes, he needed permission. Again, I don't know if it affects the sacrament if the priest is standing far away and does not touch the host. But you have to be in the same room. It's a very good question. Other Quackenbush. Oh, good. All right. Well, then I know I'm right. If Father Bassano thinks it, yeah. And don't you dare receive communion in your hands. Did he mention that before?
Oh,
I think that's Father Fasano's middle name. It's Father Jerome. Don't ever receive communion in your hands, Fasano. He's baptized that. I saw a hand. Yes. Ooh, great question. This is a deep theological question. Why do we not receive the body and the blood at Mass anymore? Luca? Yes. So it's what is the name of it? I was gonna sound so smart, and I just forgot the word. It's the doctrine. No, it's not intinction, although that's related. It's the doctrine of. Chris, can you look this up? I don't even know what to tell you. It starts with the letter I. So just look through the dictionary through all the I's and see if there's a word that relates to. It's the doctrine where, exactly as Luca described, if you receive the body, you are also receiving the blood. You're receiving the fullness of Jesus in any fragment of the host, any size host, any drop of the precious blood, or a whole chalice full of it. It's the doctrine of inseparability. No. Now, of course, we're just going to trade words back and forth, and it won't come to me. Anyway, but what the church says, you could read this in the Catechism. So when you receive the Eucharist, when you receive the host, you receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. The Christus totus in Latin. Again, you guys should be so impressed at all this Latin. Digitus, Christus totus. You're receiving the fullness of Christ. But the sign of the Eucharist, receiving under the appearance of bread and on the appearance of wine, they say that this is receiving the fullness of the sign of the Eucharist. So there are certain times when the church encourages people to receive under both species, right? On your wedding, it encourages that the priest give the precious blood and the host to the couple. At First Communion, children receiving the Eucharist for the first time, that they receive both the body and the blood under the form of bread and wine. So there is a fullness. As a practical question, why don't why is it not as common to receive from the chalice and the host? The answer is COVID. So it was the permission to give under the precious blood was rescinded, taken back by the bishops, because there would be too much exchange of spit, basically. Now, I will just say, if you think, have any of you received from a chalice? Been to a church where you received from the chalice? Okay. Have you been to a church where you received from the chalice and you're like towards the back of the line? It's kind of a little bit, you got to like really believe in the real presence. As you're going up there, like, okay, this is Jesus and some sacred spit from everyone else. So I want you to think, who purifies the chalice at the end? It's the priests. At my last parish, we would give out the precious blood, and there would be like 10 communion stations and then 10 stations with the precious blood. So the priests had to drink all of the sacred backwash from everyone in that church. And there were sometimes 1,000 people at Mass. That's a lot. And, I think that's a miracle. We should be like dead, because that's a lot of germs. But God takes care of us, which is wonderful. Anyway, so it was COVID that removed the permission, and Bishop Burbage, at least in our diocese, because the diocesan bishop sets the liturgical norms for the diocese, okay? So he only recently gave permission for churches to reintroduce distributing the Eucharist under the precious blood, but only some churches did it before COVID, and then those churches, since then, if they reintroduce it, it's usually based on the comfort level of the people. Are people going to freak out if they see people drinking from the same chalice? You can, yeah, so who was the person over here that said intinction? Was that you? Okay, so that's distributing communion by intinction. That was never taken away. So you can do that. You know what intinction is? It's where the priest will take the host, dip it in the precious blood. There's like a little mini chalice in the middle of the ciborium, which is what holds the host. And you say the body and blood of Jesus. Or is that what you say? No, body and blood of Christ? Yeah, I knew that. Body and blood of Christ. So yes, that can be done. There are not as many parishes that do that because the vessels to do communion by intinction are expensive and not many people make them. So Father Fasano has them. He has like a hoard of them in the sacrament. Screen that out, but like a hoard, like a stack of them in the safe upstairs in the sacristy. But I don't think anyone really touches them.
You should.
Tomorrow I will touch them. One other thing I'll say about, and then I'll take questions. I see other comments and thoughts, but this is. I'm trying to like somehow get my brain to tell me what that word is. Doctrine of. It's not incorporation in. Okay, but we talk about the Eucharist. What is the big T word to describe the doctrine of the Eucharist? Let's all say it together. Transubstantiation. So that is what we say, that when we use the word in philosophy, substance, it's describing what a thing is, right? So this table, as the substance of table, you guys are substantially human beings. I would hope all of you are. So the substance of bread at the time of the consecration becomes now the substance of Jesus Christ, right? But it keeps what we call the accidents or the appearance of bread and wine. So if all you did was eat the Eucharist, you would gain weight, right? Because it has the accidental qualities of bread, which means it still has calories. The accidental properties of wine also endure in the precious blood, right? So if it ceases to be alcoholic, then it ceases to be Jesus. If it's non-alcoholic wine, you can't use it at Mass. So this is something you pay attention to if you ever go to a big Mass. We had this experience. I was ordained with, there was a guy who was a missionary it was formerly called Burma. Now it's called Myanmar. It's a large country in Southeast Asia. It's near Thailand. Christians are 1% of 1% of the population. So it's mostly Hindu and Buddhist. Anyway, he was a missionary. He studied over at the seminary. He got ordained in the United States, and they thought there were going to be a ton of priests that were going to come to Mass. So the bishop consecrated chalice upon chalice of the precious blood. And there were like 20 priests. So after Mass, most of the priests just scampered off. So it was all the deacons from the seminary were tasked with consuming the precious blood. So you can't store the precious blood because it sours and it attracts the bugs. I mean, it might attract blood as well, but you can't store it. So unless you have a very particular receptacle, so you just have to throw back Jesus. I mean, you just gotta do it. So when you, all I will say is, if you've ever heard the phrase, which I would imagine is not a common phrase outside of Catholic circles who have just drunk a lot of the precious blood, being drunk on Jesus is an actual thing that can happen. I'm not saying it did happen. I'm just saying it could happen because the accidental properties of alcohol still perdure in the precious blood. So if you ever go to a large Mass, every priest that celebrates the Mass has to receive both the host and the precious blood. They have to receive under both. So watch at the end of Mass. Sometimes you'll watch everyone. The deacons have to come up and purify the vessels, which means sometimes they have to consume the precious blood. And then you just watch the deacons go to the side and like collapse into their chair. Some of them are trying to process the alcoholic content of the precious blood. And they are sleeping, swooning with Jesus. So I had the experience of it's very difficult. Most of you do not drink alcohol, which is good. If when you turn 21 and are living a life of prudence and temperance, you should never guzzle a glass of wine. However, Mass has to end, so it is sometimes required that you guzzle a chalice of the precious blood. And Jesus can really knock you on your buttocks. Mr. Quackenbush. No, were you the next one? Did I answer your question? Good.
This is just
Quack.
along with that. So because alcohol goes into your bloodstream, does that mean that you have precious blood in
Your actual bloodstream.
Yes.
That is a great question. I would like to say the answer is yes. I know. Ponder that. Ponder that. Eucharistic miracles. Ms. Bergeron.
Because they talk about, Father Simon mentioned about how like the Eucharist is still present in you for the next like 15 minutes, but like once it loses the appearance of bread and wine, then it's not Jesus anymore. So
Correct.
maybe by the time it gets to the place,
If it is not visibly bread and wine, this is what we attach. And so Jesus chose things that were bread and look like bread, and were wine and look like wine. So the church uses that biblical standard. If it ceases to look like bread, or it ceases to look like wine. So, for example, if you water down wine to the point where there is no more alcohol, or the alcohol content falls below what regular wine would be, it can no longer be used for the precious blood. Or if it was the precious blood, it is no longer. The divine presence leaves. If you drop a host, falls on the ground, it gets dirtied, or someone spits up a host and you don't feel like consuming it, you would submerge the host in water. So as it becomes more and more watery, it loses the consistency of bread, therefore ceases to be the Eucharist. It's still something sacred, but it is not the Eucharist. This is, when you, I don't know if you've heard the story of the Eucharistic miracle in Buenos Aires. That was in 1996. That was what happened. A host had fallen in a candle holder. It was on the side of the church. Someone had just taken the host and dropped it in the candle holder. A Eucharistic minister found it, brought it to the priest. The priest put it in water because they didn't know how long this host had been sitting here. It was covered with dust, bugs, put it in the water, let it sit in the tabernacle. And then over the next months and then years, what would have usually dissolved into like nothingness. Like if you put a piece of bread in water, it dissolves, right? It kind of becomes filmy and gross and it doesn't look like bread anymore. the host not only maintained its consistency, but then started to bleed. That's a miracle. Generally, that is not what happens. That is not what happens to a host. So, yes, Ms. Bergeron, was that suffice?
Well, I have one other question.
Okay,
So
Luca,
we
then
have-
we'll come to you.
since we have the buses for vacation and we used to use them, why don't we, like, why haven't we gone back? Just out of curiosity.
Wow. Does she even work here? That is a great question, and I do not know the answer. I think it would just be a matter of preference of the. I don't even know if it's preference of the priest. It's just Tweety. Do all of you know who Tweety is?
Yeah.
She runs this parish. So if she does not put out the intinction set, it doesn't even cross my mind to use it. So maybe you all have to pay off Tweety to put the intinction set out, and then there will be intinction at Mass. So, or you could come early and do it, right? Could you serve? Yeah. Okay, Luca. Okay.
Going back to it, have the would that mean we don't have to be worried about any problems that fall before?
Visible particles, right? So things that you have to. So something you don't want to like. There were some people like, oh my gosh, maybe an atom fell off the Eucharist, so Jesus is being like atomically stepped on and atomically visible particles of bread
Like if you can't
under the
fly,
Eucharist. What's that?
you can't tell that it's
Yes, and the other thing is, my friends, we both believe in the real presence, but our God is also, his plan transcends reason, but also accords with reason. So we don't need to be freaking out about like exactly. If you didn't know, you cannot be held responsible for things you can't possibly know. Which doesn't mean you stay in eternal ignorance and just try not to learn things, and then you're going to be, kind of get off scot-free. But things like this that are beyond, like how, when you're not looking and the priest isn't looking and a microscopic fleck of the Eucharist falls off, it doesn't mean everyone's committing like sacrilege because visible particles. We trust in God. He's going to take care of it.
And the Eucharistic miracle is when the bread miraculous or the host is miraculously turned into like an actual flesh.
Mm-hmm.
Would that mean that it's not like we shouldn't be adoring that anymore? It's not.
We shouldn't be. What you
We
said?
shouldn't be adoring it as
Adoring, right?
the body and blood of full infinity. It's not. It doesn't have the appearance of bread.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We were actually talking about on Saturday night. The priests were talking about. He said, if it takes on the appearance of like actual human tissue, do we still adore it? Because it's like, is it still the Eucharist? Because the Eucharist has to have the appearance of bread to be the Eucharist. This is now heart tissue. So the question that we were asking as the priests were discussing at dinner was, is the heart tissue or whatever the tissue that is appearing on the that appears in the miracle, is that biologically and personally the flesh of Jesus? Because if it is the glorified flesh of Jesus that actually appears on the host, then you should be adoring, right? Because it's Christ, the living Christ. So, Luke, I do not know the answer to that question. We should, insofar as it is the Eucharist, and if the Eucharist, or it's a Eucharistic miracle, I think the adoration is still afforded to it. And we can base that on the fact that the remnants or relics of Eucharistic miracles down through the ages, like Lanciano, are still adored. People genuflect to them. What is the only other non-Eucharistic reality in the Christian life that you genuflect to with your right knee? There are other things that you genuflect to on your left knee. Bergeron. Nope, left knee. I mean, maybe you could do your right knee, but like right now. We don't have a king. Our only king is Jesus. Pope Francis doesn't like people genuflect. I guess you, no, but you do it on the left knee to the Pope. Left knee to the Pope, yes. True cross, relics of the true cross. Relics of the true cross and Good Friday to the cross. Any other time if you see a cross, you bow. On Good Friday, you genuflect. If it's a relic of the true cross, any relic of the true cross, you genuflect. Parente in the back, the far parente. Oh, and then you, Maria. We'll come to you. Mm-hmm. She said that. Mhm. I'm glad that you noticed that.